So you got a TTR125, like this old junky worn out one here, and you just want a little bit more pep out of it, or maybe your stock carburetor is going crap like they all do, and you want to get rid of this thing. One of the best bangs for your buck you can do is get a clone VM24 Carb. These can be had for cheap online. Let me show you the correct way to set them up and get yourself flying down the trail on these little fun bikes. These bikes were sold with this type of carburetor on it originally. These bikes have to meet all kind of emissions regulations just like everything else these days. So one of the things that kind of complicates this carburetor is it's got a weird diaphragm system in here that whenever it detects a lot of engine vacuum through a port, it'll actually close all the fuel going off into the carburetor and not let it backfire. Kind of a silly way of, you know, not letting it waste any kind of fuel but still having a piece of junk. So this carburetor sucks. I had never had any kind of luck with this one as soon as I bought this. So what I like to do on all these is I like to upgrade to these aftermarket VM24 style carburetors. The VM24 is actually a Mikuni design. It was designed for two-stroke applications a pretty long time ago. It's a fairly antiquated design and it's very simple. It uses a simple needle jet, and that's about it, and a very simple pilot system. So compared to this guy, it simplifies things a lot. One thing you will notice whenever you switch from the stock Yamaha style, which has a choke cable that runs up to a choke button, you'll have to eliminate that. The choke is actually built onto the carburetor itself, which you can see in these pictures. Once you install it, some of these have the choke in kind of a funny place, but trust me, you're only going to use that choke every now and again when it's really cold. After you get this carburetor properly set up, you won't touch the choke for the rest of the day. The stock carburetor, once removed, is very close in dimension to the VM24. The original carburetor is a slight bit longer. However, I was able to fit my VM24 in here with no modifications. These are the stock boots and everything fits nice and tight and we have no air leaks. One thing that is different about this, that if you use a genuine Mikuni style that's genuine, is you will have to modify the cap on the throttle assembly to let the TTR style stock throttle fit into there. A lot of these aftermarket ones, which I'll include in the link here, should have the throttle set up already. I didn't have to modify this one at all. It came pre-jetted. The only thing that I have to do on here is whenever these come up, there's a little bit of confusion sometimes on how to set them up correctly. Of course, you have your fuel inlet that goes up into the top. You know, it's going to be like a 1/4 inch style, just like any other carburetor. There's going to be two hoses that need to be attached to here. You have the one that comes up out of the bowl. This is your actual bowl vent. If the bike is ever leaned over too far or any kind of normal operation where fuel will slosh up, this tube right here, which you need to hang all the way down through your frame, may occasionally have a little bit of fuel drip out of it, and that's fairly normal. Our other hose that's going to be hooked up on here is the one that goes to the drain. If you ever open up the drain screw on the bowl, this is where the fuel will drain out of the bowl, and of course not go onto a hot engine and, you know, start a fire. So we also will drape that one down as well. Whenever you buy these carburetors, occasionally they will also come with a hose hooked up onto this port. This port is used on some applications for vacuum accessories. Working on a lot of street bikes, occasionally you'll come across some fuel petcocks that don't have an off position. They'll have a reserve, and on, and then they'll have something position that says PRI. What you will find with those is there's actually a vacuum line that runs from the intake manifold up to the petcock. Whenever vacuum is applied to it via the engine cranking, spinning over, it allows fuel to drain through there. It essentially makes a petcock where you don't have to shut the fuel off. It does it for you. This bike has no vacuum accessories on it at all, so we must take a vacuum cap and plug this port. If you do not, you'll have a massive vacuum leak here that you'll never be able to tune your idle circuit, and you'll get incredibly poor throttle response and things of those nature. So cap this port off, have a hose going to this one and a hose going to this one, and of course your fuel going in the top, and that's all you need to do as far as the setup on here. Make sure you're good and set up in here where you have no binding on your throttle and your fuel line's not kinked. Sometimes you may need to use a longer fuel line. If you do, of course, be smart the way you route it. Don't stick it in the spring or anything like that, or any moving parts where they're gonna cut your fuel hose and start a fire. And of course, a fuel filter is always a great idea too. You don't want to put a brand new carburetor on here and then introduce a bunch of garbage into it and ruin it. Let me show you how we're going to tune this carburetor now. This is the other side of the VM24 carburetor. As noted before, this carburetor was never designed to go on this Yamaha TTR125. It's a two-stroke carburetor, so as you can see, it kind of faces backwards in here. This is our choke. In order to open and close that, it's a simple pulling it and pushing it back in. This other screw, which has some thumb ridges on it, is actually our idle speed. If you notice that your idle's never set correctly or anything like that, you can actually reach in there and burn your hand on this exhaust pipe, or what I like to use is a long screwdriver and actually get up to the end of it, because it actually has some Phillips screws on it at the end of it. Our most important screw that you should be able to really not have to mess with a whole lot is the mixture screw, which is the hardest one to get to. If we look at right where my finger is pointing, right here, there's going to be a small flat head screw in there. That is how we control our pilot. The pilot is what controls our idle mixture. So of course we need, have a good strong idle so that we can pull the clutch in, we don't stall. Of course it also controls our very light throttle coming right off of idle, which is incredibly important in dirt bike riding. We need to have a snappy throttle so that we can, pop the clutch, maneuver obstacles, and not fall on our face and look like a goon. So this is our process that we need to do to tune this carburetor. We need to start the bike. We need to set the idle speed to an approximately decent speed. Once we get this bike warm by riding it a few minutes, we need to somehow get in here and adjust this screw. Sometimes it may be necessary to adjust your clamps just so that you can turn the carburetor one way or the other in order to get a small pocket screwdriver in there. The process that we're going to go through on here is we're going to set the screw to approximately about 1.5 to 2 turns out from lightly based in. And so we're going to tighten it all the way clockwise until it very lightly bottoms out, and then we're going to open it approximately 1.5 to 2 turns out. Once we do that, we're going to get the bike warm, and while the bike is running at idle speed, we're going to slowly start adjusting that pilot screw. If we tighten it clockwise, we'll be leaning the mixture out. If we open it up, we'll be richening the mixture. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look for the highest idle speed. So what we'll do is we'll first try to go richer. We'll, as it's going, we'll keep going until we notice the idle slow down. Once we do that, then we'll go back the other way. And then we'll get to a point where it starts stumbling again. Our perfect mixture should be about somewhere in the middle of that. We're going to notice that the idle speed will increase, and it'll have a really good happy tone, real strong idle. After you do that, you may have to turn your idle speed down back a little bit and set it to an approximate, where you need it to. After you do that and the needle goes back down in the slide, we may end up having to adjust the pilot once more. We may have to go through that process of back and forth until we find that sweet spot. And then, there's a chance the idle may even increase a little bit more. So sometimes that whole process of setting the idle and the mixture to get to the perfect point sometimes takes 2 to 3 times of going through those same steps. But once you do, you're going to get a very strong idle. These VM24 carburetors, when set up correctly, are going to give you way stronger of an idle than you've ever had with the stock Yamaha carb. Tell you the truth, I never even touched this choke on my bike. I live here in the south and we have a pretty temperate climate, but even when it's cold, I just start this bike right up, usually one kick. This thing's completely cold, have not driven it for really days. Let's see how it starts. Turn our fuel on. One kick. What do you guys think? I think it does pretty good. Now that's left to do is to go have fun on it. it.